Have you ever had a moment when something felt just off? A smell, a glance, a shift in the air that made you question everything? I had one of those moments that morning, sitting at Emily's dining table, the strange metallic aroma of the coffee swirling in my nose. It wasn't the typical scent of the morning brew that I had come to expect. No, this was different, unsettling, like it wasn't meant for me at all. I tried to push it aside, but the memory of similar incidents flooded my mind, each more unsettling than the last. It wasn't the first time I'd felt strange after a meal at Emily's house. I'd brushed it off at first, convinced I was just overly sensitive. But 3 years of marriage to David and countless meals at her house had started to form a pattern, a disturbing one I couldn't ignore. I was Mary, 29, and after everything I had been through, I never thought I'd be questioning my own husband's motives. I sat there, pretending to be polite, watching David, my husband, smiling at me with a look that didn't quite meet his eyes. It wasn't a real smile, not the kind that said he was genuinely happy. It was something else. Something that made my stomach churn. "Don't you want to try the coffee I made especially for you, honey?" he asked. His voice, the way it hovered in the air, felt wrong, almost too rehearsed. Across from me, Emily stirred her coffee slowly, watching me with an expression I couldn't quite place. "David's been really into making coffee lately," she said, her voice too sweet. "He's been practicing different brewing methods just for you." The way she said "just for you" sent a chill down my spine. It was a strange thing to say given that I never asked him to make coffee, let alone spend time perfecting it. And then there was the smell. I glanced at the mug in front of me again, trying to push the unease down. I forced a smile, trying to seem normal, though inside I felt a growing sense of panic. The strange aroma from the cup lingered in my nose, reminding me of that time last month when I'd ended up in the emergency room after drinking tea at Emily's house. The doctors hadn't been able to explain my symptoms, nausea, dizziness, and confusion, but Emily insisted she made the tea exactly the way she made it for herself. I dismissed it at the time, convinced it was some strange coincidence. But now I wasn't so sure. My heart began to pound, and I felt a bead of sweat forming at my temple. "How thoughtful of you," I said, my voice tight with forced cheerfulness. My eyes met Emily's across the table, and I saw that flicker of something that didn't belong in her gaze. It was the same look I'd seen before, the one that made me question if there was something more behind the surface, something darker. I lifted the coffee cup, pretending to take a sip while my mind raced. The taste was just as I expected, metallic, bitter, but I couldn't place it. I set it back down, hoping no one would notice my hesitation. Emily and David exchanged a glance, just a flicker, but it was enough to confirm my suspicions. Something was wrong. I didn't know what yet, but I would find out. Trying to remain calm, I glanced at my phone. "Oh, would you look at that?" I said, standing up abruptly. "I need to make a quick call for work. Emily, would you mind if I use your study?" The words spilled out, rehearsed in my mind, but the real plan was in motion. As I walked past the table, I deliberately stumbled, causing my hand to brush against the cups. In the confusion of steadying myself, I switched the mugs. "I'm so sorry," I exclaimed, straightening up, forcing my clumsy persona. Emily waved it off with that tight, uncomfortable smile. "Just try not to break anything in the study." I nodded, trying to keep my pulse steady, and hurried away, my heart pounding. As I entered the study, I could still hear them at the table, the murmur of their voices faint, but enough to make my skin prickle. I took a deep breath, peering through the doorway, my eyes trained on Emily. She lifted the cup to her lips, and I watched, waiting for a reaction. My stomach twisted. I wanted to warn her, stop her, but I couldn't. Not yet. I needed to know the truth. Too many times I'd been sent to the hospital with inexplicable symptoms after meals with them. Too many times I'd felt humiliated and helpless, all the while being told it was just a coincidence, no more. This time, I was going to find out if all those accidents had been what they seemed. My mind raced through the past year, the strange stomach pains after breakfast at their house, the unexplained allergic reactions. It was all adding up, and I wasn't going to be the fool anymore. My hands trembled, but I stayed still, watching Emily's every move. She lifted the cup to her mouth. I felt a sickening knot in my stomach. Was this happening again? Would it end like last time, with me doubled over in pain, alone and vulnerable? Or would I finally get the answers I needed? I stood there, watching Emily take the first sip from the swapped mug. My heart thudded in my chest, each beat louder than the last, the seconds stretched into what felt like an eternity. A part of me wanted to rush over and stop her, but I couldn't. Not yet. I needed to see how far this would go, needed to confirm the sickening truth that had been lurking at the back of my mind for months. I could hear them talking quietly, but their words were just out of reach. Emily was shaking her head slowly, her fingers trembling as she set the cup down. Her face had drained of color. "David," she said, her voice suddenly unsteady. "Something's wrong." Her eyes flicked nervously from him to the cup, and I saw it. The fear. The kind of fear that only comes when you know you've crossed a line that can't be undone. David, for his part, seemed unfazed at first, his casual demeanor almost too perfect. He was leaning back in his chair, his fingers tapping absently on the table. "What do you mean?" he asked, trying to sound nonchalant, but I caught the twitch in his jaw. Emily's hands were shaking now, visibly struggling to keep it together. "David," she repeated, this time her voice cracking. "What did you put in that coffee?" I could see David's eyes flicker toward the mug, then back to Emily. His smile faltered, just for a split second, but it was enough to make my blood run cold. Before he could respond, Emily's face contorted, a wave of nausea washing over her. I don't feel right," she stammered, grabbing at the edge of the table to steady herself. David's expression shifted, and suddenly all the calmness, all the pretense, vanished. He was standing now, knocking his chair over in the process, his eyes wide with panic. "Nah, what's happening?" His voice cracked. "Nah, stay with me." He reached for her, but she swatted his hands away, a look of disgust crossing her face. I stayed hidden in the study, my hands shaking as I steadied my phone. The recording was already in progress. I needed proof. This wasn't just a coincidence. This wasn't just an upset stomach. This was something far worse. "Nah, what did you do?" I heard him whisper, his voice thick with regret. He looked lost, like the calm, confident man I married was suddenly unraveling in front of me. But it was too late. The mask had already slipped, and I could see the truth underneath it. Emily struggled to speak, her words coming out in ragged breaths. "You promised it would just make her sick enough to miss the board meeting. You said it wouldn't be traced," she spat, her anger rising despite her weakening state. "You said it wouldn't be traced," her voice cracked, tears filling her eyes as she collapsed against the chair. I stood frozen in place, my stomach churning. They had been trying to sabotage me. All this time, every single instance of illness, every unexplained reaction, it was all part of their plan. They weren't just trying to slow me down or make me sick for a day. No, this was deliberate. This was calculated. They had been trying to take me out of the equation entirely. The sudden realization hit me with a brutal force. The board meeting next week, the big presentation I was scheduled for, the one I had worked so hard for, had been the real target. And the only thing standing in their way was me. I felt the sting of betrayal deep in my chest, but there was no time for tears, no time for regret. I could already hear David's frantic voice, his pleas for Emily to calm down. "It wasn't supposed to go this far," he said, his voice shaking. "We just needed to slow you down. You were working too hard, Mary. You were taking all the big accounts. Emily said if we could just make you take some time off, you'd stop interfering with her plans." Time seemed to stretch endlessly as I processed his words. Emily? Emily had been part of this all along? My mind raced through everything, the endless accidents, the unexpected illnesses. It wasn't just carelessness, it was sabotage, a systematic effort to destroy me piece by piece. Finally, Emily, in her state of panic and exhaustion, turned her gaze to me, frozen in the doorway, hidden from their view. Her eyes locked onto mine, and for the first time I saw something that terrified me more than her cruel schemes. Fear. True, raw fear. The kind of fear that comes when you realize your carefully constructed world is crumbling. Her voice wavered as she gasped, barely able to whisper, "You switched the cups. You knew." The accusation hung in the air between us, a bitter taste I could hardly stomach. It wasn't a question, it was a statement. And in that moment, everything I'd suspected about David and Emily's betrayal had been confirmed. I didn't know what to say. There was nothing to say. I just stared at her, my mind reeling from the magnitude of the revelation. I had been the target all along. The plan had been in motion for months, and I had barely noticed. "Call an ambulance," Emily begged, her voice barely above a whisper. She was still trembling, but it was no longer just from the poison. It was from fear. The fear that came when you realized your actions had led you down a path you couldn't escape. I took a deep breath, my hands steady despite the chaos unfolding around me. I dialed 911, keeping my voice calm and clear. "We need an ambulance at 1542 Maple Grove Drive," I said, my voice firm. "My sister-in-law appears to be having a severe reaction to something in her coffee. She's conscious but experiencing tremors." I glanced once more at Emily. Her eyes were wide with panic, still processing what had just happened, what she had just admitted to. But it was too late. The truth was out, and there was no turning back. The minutes felt like hours as I stayed on the line with the 911 dispatcher, calmly explaining the situation, my voice unwavering. Inside, I was a storm of anger, disbelief, and something colder, more calculating, an urgent need for clarity. The truth had come crashing down on me, and now I had to act quickly. I watched Emily, slumped over in her chair, her trembling hands clinging to the edge of the table as she struggled to stay upright. David was pacing now, his frantic steps echoing in the otherwise silent room. "What did you put in that coffee?" Emily demanded again, her voice hoarse with panic. Her face had lost its usual composure, and she looked almost small, vulnerable. Gone was the woman who had always prided herself on control. She was just as much a pawn in this as I was, just a willing accomplice to a plan that had gone wrong. David's face twisted, a mix of guilt and fear that was almost unrecognizable. His usual charm had faded, leaving behind only the shell of a man who had no escape. "Nah, calm down. This isn't what you think," he stammered, his voice pleading. But Emily was having none of it. She pushed herself up from the table, her body shaking as she stood, glaring at him with a look I had never seen before. "You said it wouldn't hurt her. You said it would just make her miss the meeting. You lied to me, David. You said it wasn't supposed to be like this." Her voice cracked, but she wasn't backing down. David opened his mouth to respond, but nothing came out. He just stood there, helpless, watching Emily's symptoms worsen by the second. The silence between them spoke volumes. There was no going back now. They had crossed a line, and there was no pretending anymore. I was about to take another step forward, maybe confront them directly, but the urgency in Emily's voice stopped me in my tracks. I think I'm going to pass out," she muttered, her breath coming in shallow gasps. Her body swayed slightly, and she crumpled back into the chair, her eyes rolling back. I felt a cold jolt of panic run through me, but I kept my composure. I couldn't let fear take hold, not now. I could hear the sirens in the distance. The ambulance was almost here. I turned my attention back to the phone in my hand, trying to keep calm as the dispatcher reassured me that help was on the way. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling that something more was at play. The coffee, the sickness, the way Emily's sudden illness mirrored my episodes. It was all part of the plan. But why? What had I been missing all these months? As the sirens grew louder, I knew I had to act fast. I could feel the weight of the evidence, my suspicions, the bizarre string of coincidences that had plagued my life for months, all pointing to one thing. They had been poisoning me. All this time, they had been poisoning me, trying to ruin my career, my life. But why? It wasn't just about the board meeting or the presentation. No, it went deeper than that. There was more at stake here. And I needed answers. When the ambulance arrived, I stepped aside, allowing the paramedics to do their work. They didn't ask many questions, just immediately assessed Emily's condition. The situation had already spiraled beyond anything they could handle with a few simple interventions. They needed to get her to the hospital, and fast. David stood to the side, his face pale, his hands shaking as the paramedics wheeled Emily out of the house. He was in shock, but I could see it in his eyes, the realization that his carefully constructed world was coming apart. His silence was more damning than anything he could have said. I had to stay calm, had to stay focused. I was in control now, the one with the upper hand. As the paramedics loaded Emily into the ambulance, I turned to face David, my voice cold. "I'll be going to the hospital with her," I said flatly. "I think you should stay here. I don't want to get in the way of your plans." David opened his mouth as if to protest, but he didn't speak. He just stood there, watching as I climbed into the back of the ambulance, my mind already racing ahead. There was still so much to uncover, so much that didn't make sense. Why would they risk everything just to stop me? Was it jealousy? Was it about the business? Or was it something more personal? As the ambulance sped down the street, I stared out the window, the weight of everything settling over me. The betrayal, the sickness, the pain, it was all connected. And now, finally, I had the proof. When we arrived at the hospital, I made sure to capture every moment, to hold on to the evidence. I needed it. The confession, the moment of clarity, and the one thing that had always been nagging at me, the question of why. I was determined to find out. I wasn't going to let them get away with this, not this time. I sat in the sterile hospital waiting room, the fluorescent lights buzzing overhead, filling the silence with a sense of unease. My heart was still racing, the events of the past few hours replaying in my mind like a nightmare I couldn't wake from. Emily was in one of the back rooms, hooked up to IVs, her body still trembling from whatever poison had coursed through her veins. I hadn't seen David since we arrived, and I wasn't sure where he had gone, but I could feel his presence even from a distance. His silence, his fear, it was suffocating, and it didn't matter how many times I tried to push it away. It was clear now. The person I had trusted the most had orchestrated my downfall. The sound of footsteps interrupted my thoughts, and I turned to see a nurse entering the waiting area. She was followed by a doctor, tall, with graying hair and sharp eyes that immediately took in everything, the tension in the air, the tightness in my shoulders, the way I was sitting there, pretending to be calm when my world had just shattered. "Mrs. Bennett," she said, her voice professional but compassionate, "I'm Dr. Phillips. We've stabilized your sister-in-law, but we need to talk about her condition." I stood, feeling my knees go weak. I wasn't sure how much I could handle, but I needed to hear it. I needed to know. "What's happening?" My voice felt small and shaky as I spoke, but I forced myself to stay focused. Dr. Phillips looked down at the tablet in her hand, scrolling through Emily's medical records. "We found concerning levels of toxins in her system," she began, her voice steady but laced with something more serious. "These aren't substances we typically see in food or drink. They're typically used in pharmaceutical testing. We'll need to run more tests to be sure, but it's clear that this wasn't accidental." The weight of her words settled over me like a lead blanket. I knew what this meant. I had known it for months, but now I had the confirmation. The incidents, my illness, the strange food poisoning, the allergic reactions. It had all been part of something far worse than I had ever imagined. And it wasn't just Emily. No, it was both of them. David, my husband, had been part of this. The thought made my stomach twist with a deep, gnawing pain, but I couldn't afford to break down now. I needed to stay strong. "Are you saying she was poisoned?" I asked, my voice steady despite the storm raging inside me. Dr. Phillips nodded. "Yes, Emily's condition was caused by deliberate poisoning. We don't have all the details yet, but we'll know more once the tests come back. What I can tell you is that the substances in her system don't occur naturally in the food we eat." I closed my eyes for a brief moment, my mind racing back to everything I had endured over the past several months. The unexplained symptoms, the trips to urgent care, the strange reactions, everything pointed to the same thing. They had been poisoning me. David and Emily had been poisoning me, and now they had gone too far, targeting her in the process. This wasn't just about food. This was about something much darker, something insidious. I could feel my blood begin to boil as the reality of their betrayal settled deeper in my bones. "I need to speak with her," I said, my voice more resolute now, though my insides felt hollow. I had to know the full truth, every twisted detail of their plot. I had already been recording everything on my phone, every word they'd said, every exchange. But hearing it from Emily herself, that would change everything. "Doctor," Phillips didn't hesitate. "I'll take you to her, but just be aware, she's not doing well. She's in and out of consciousness, and it may take a while for her to recover." I nodded, not bothering to hide my determination. I had to face her, had to confront her. I needed to understand why. Why they had done this to me, and more importantly, why Emily had been complicit. The woman who had once welcomed me into her family, who had seemed so kind and genuine, how could she have turned into someone capable of this? We walked down the hallway to Emily's room in silence, the sound of our footsteps echoing through the sterile corridor. When we reached the door, I hesitated for a moment, taking a deep breath before stepping inside. Emily was lying in the hospital bed, her body still trembling slightly despite the IV fluids keeping her hydrated. Her face was pale, and the usual fire in her eyes was replaced with fear and something deeper, regret. She glanced at me as I entered, her eyes wide, filled with panic. But there was something else there too. Guilt. "Mary," she whispered, her voice hoarse and weak. I'm so sorry." I couldn't speak for a moment. Seeing her like this, broken, vulnerable, was a far cry from the woman who had always seemed in control. For a moment, I almost felt pity for her, but that quickly faded, replaced by a cold, burning rage. "You're sorry?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper, but the words carried. "Sorry for what? For poisoning me? For poisoning yourself? For trying to destroy everything I've worked for?" I felt my anger rising, but I held it in check. I wasn't here to rage at her. I needed answers. Her hand shook as she reached out toward me, her voice strained. "It wasn't supposed to go this far. We didn't think you'd keep pushing forward, Mary. You were taking all the accounts. You were better than me. And David, She trailed off, her breath coming in shallow gasps. I leaned in, my eyes narrowing. "David? He helped you?" My heart felt like it had stopped in my chest. The last thing I wanted was to hear it from her, but I had to know. I had to hear the truth from the person who had been at the center of it all. Emily nodded weakly. He thought if we could just make you sick enough to stay home for a while, you'd miss the big presentation. He said it would keep you from taking over everything. I never wanted this to go this far, but we were desperate." She paused, her face contorting with pain. "I was just trying to keep my place. I never thought it would end up like this." The words hit me like a slap to the face. They hadn't just tried to ruin my career. No, they had been trying to take me down, to destroy everything I had worked so hard for. And now, here we were. The truth was finally out in the open, and nothing would ever be the same again. "I don't care about your excuses, Emily," I said, my voice steady, though my heart was pounding in my chest. This wasn't about jealousy or competition. This was about trying to break me, and you almost succeeded. She looked at me, tears welling up in her eyes, but there was no pity in her gaze, only the fear that she had lost everything. I stood up, taking one last look at her before turning toward the door. "I'm going to make sure you both pay for this," I said, my voice cold. "I don't care how long it takes. You'll answer for what you did." As I left her room, I could hear her sobbing softly behind me, but it didn't matter anymore. The truth was out, and now it was time for me to get justice. The air in the hospital felt heavier than before, filled with a sense of finality and dread. As I stepped out of Emily's room, I couldn't shake the feeling that everything I had once known about my life had been turned upside down. The truth about David and Emily's betrayal hung in the air, suffocating me. But there was no time to dwell on the shock. No time to mourn the destruction of my marriage and family. I needed to keep moving forward. I needed to get justice. I stepped into the hallway, trying to steady my breath. The cool, sterile environment of the hospital had started to feel suffocating, almost like a prison. The fluorescent lights buzzed above me, and the hum of voices seemed too loud, too intrusive, as I made my way down the corridor toward the police officers who had arrived earlier. Detective Mendoza was standing near the nurses' station, talking to an officer in a low voice. As soon as she saw me, she motioned for me to come over. Her demeanor was calm and professional, but I could see the underlying urgency in her eyes. She was already piecing together what had happened, connecting the dots in the way only an experienced investigator could. "Mrs. Bennett," she said, her voice steady, "we need to speak with you about what happened today. Do you have a moment?" I nodded, my mind still reeling from the conversation with Emily. The last thing I wanted to do was relive the details of their plan, but I knew it was necessary. I had to make sure that everything was on the record and that the pieces of the puzzle were put together correctly. "I'll make time," I said, my voice cool and controlled. Despite the chaos swirling inside me, I had to remain composed. For once, I couldn't afford to break down. Detective Mendoza led me to a quiet room down the hall, away from the bustle of the emergency department. I sat down across from her, my hands folded tightly in my lap. I could feel the weight of the situation pressing down on me, but I pushed it aside. I had been through too much to let it all slip away now. She took a seat opposite me, her eyes narrowing slightly as she studied me. "We've already spoken to Emily," she began. "She's in no condition to give a full statement, but we're getting pieces from her. What I need now is for you to tell me everything you know about your relationship with David and Emily, every detail, no matter how small." I nodded, taking a deep breath. It was time to lay everything out, to connect the dots for the police. "It started months ago," I said, my voice surprisingly steady. "It was small at first, just some stomach issues after meals at their house, or maybe some minor allergic reactions. But then it started happening more frequently. I'd feel sick after every meal, and it wasn't just normal food poisoning. Something felt wrong. I brushed it off at first, thinking it was just bad luck. But then I began to notice a pattern. I paused for a moment, letting the words sink in. I could feel the weight of everything I was saying, the accusations that were now out in the open. David always had an explanation. He'd say it was something I ate earlier or that I must be coming down with something. But the pattern didn't stop. It didn't make sense. It wasn't until I was hospitalized after a breakfast at their house 2 months ago that I started putting it together. Detective Mendoza nodded, taking notes as I spoke. She didn't interrupt, allowing me to recount the details at my own pace. I told her about the strange tea incident and how I had ended up in urgent care after drinking a cup that Emily had prepared. I described the vague but unsettling conversations I had overheard between David and Emily and the strange texts I had found on his phone that seemed too secretive to ignore. And then I told her about the coffee. The cup David had made for me that morning, the one with the metallic smell, the one I had switched with Emily's, how it had been the final confirmation, the proof I needed to see that this was not an isolated incident, that this was deliberate, that they had been poisoning me. "Do you think this was just about business?" Detective Mendoza asked, her tone still neutral but with a flicker of curiosity. "Is it possible that they were trying to sabotage your career in some way?" I didn't hesitate. "Yes," I said firmly. "It wasn't just about my health. They were trying to keep me from succeeding. I was up for a major presentation, one that David knew would be important to my career. They thought if they could make me sick enough, I'd miss it. They wanted me out of the picture." Detective Mendoza nodded thoughtfully, her pen moving swiftly across her notepad. "And what about Emily? What's her role in all this? You said she seemed to be involved." I swallowed hard, the anger rising in my chest again. Emily was just as much a part of it as David. She played a key role in all of this. She was the one who kept pushing the idea of making me sick, of getting me out of the way. She was desperate to keep her place, to keep her spot in the family business. She didn't care what it took to make that happen. I leaned forward, my voice low but firm. But what they did to me, this was beyond anything I ever expected from them. This wasn't just jealousy. This was a calculated, systematic attempt to break me. And now I know it wasn't just me they were targeting. They tried to poison Emily too, just to cover up their tracks, to make it seem like they hadn't been involved. Detective Mendoza looked up from her notes, her expression hardening. You have proof, don't you? I reached into my bag and pulled out my phone. I hadn't told Emily yet, but I had been recording everything. Every conversation, every slip of the tongue, every confession. I tapped a few buttons and the audio file began to play. David's voice came through the speaker, his words as clear as day. It wasn't supposed to go this far. We just needed to slow her down. Just enough to keep her out of the way. She was taking everything I worked for. The sound of Emily's voice was next, shaky but unmistakable. You said it wouldn't hurt her, David. You said it would just make her miss the meeting, just enough to throw her off track. I felt a cold rush of satisfaction as the tape played, hearing the truth spill from their mouths. This was it. The evidence I needed. The confessions. The truth that would bring them down. Detective Mendoza paused the recording, her eyes narrowing as she looked at me. This will help us build the case, Mary, she said, her voice firm. But I need you to be ready. This isn't over. They'll try to deny it, to cover it up, but we'll make sure justice is done. I nodded, the weight of everything finally starting to settle in. The truth was out there now, in their own words, and nothing would ever be the same again. The next few days blurred together as the investigation moved forward. Every detail I had gathered, every conversation I had secretly recorded was carefully examined. It was a strange mix of relief and anxiety, relief that the truth was finally out, but anxiety about what lay ahead. David and Emily were still out there, and I had no illusions about their willingness to fight back, to deny everything. They had always been so careful with their manipulations, their lies. Now, though, they were caught in their web, and I had a front-row seat to watch it unravel. Detective Mendoza kept me updated regularly, her voice steady, even when the news she delivered was anything but reassuring. The toxicology reports from the hospital confirmed what we already knew. Emily had been poisoned with a combination of chemicals that weren't just dangerous, they were deliberate. And there was more, much more. David's involvement was becoming clearer by the minute. Police had seized his phone records, his email account, and even access to his work computer. And with every new search, more incriminating evidence came to light. The most damning discovery came when investigators found a series of encrypted files on David's laptop, meticulously detailing the substances he and Emily had been using to make me sick. The files were shocking, listing dosage amounts, the timing of their attacks, and even their success rates. They had been experimenting, testing different ways to weaken me without causing fatal damage, all while keeping up the facade of their concern. The worst part was that the documents weren't just about me, they were also about Emily's business and her competition. She had been so desperate to maintain her position that she had been working with David to eliminate anyone who threatened her. I was the first, but I wasn't the last. As I read the files in the sterile, quiet room of the detective's office, the full scope of their conspiracy hit me like a punch to the gut. I thought back to the countless accidents I had experienced. The tea, the breakfast, the coffee. They weren't random. They were part of a long, calculated effort to take me down, to erase me from their lives, to make sure I would never succeed. They had planned it all, from the timing to the method. It was chilling to realize just how far they were willing to go. Then came the texts, an entire string of messages between David and Emily. At first, they seemed innocuous, but after everything I had uncovered, I could see the coded language beneath their words. One exchange stood out in particular. David, she's getting stronger, might need something more next time. Emily, we can't go too far, David, just enough to keep her from the big meeting next week. David, I've got a stronger mix this time, she won't make it. I stared at the screen, my hand trembling as I read the words over and over. The chilling realization hit me again. They had been planning my downfall for months, and they were willing to go to any lengths to make sure I lost everything. The pieces were all falling into place. David had not only been the one to put the poison in the coffee that day, but he had also been orchestrating every step of the plot. Emily had been complicit from the start, working alongside him to ensure I wouldn't succeed. They had been using their positions in the family, their influence, to manipulate the situation and make sure I was kept in the dark. The worst part was, they had tried to make me feel like I was losing my mind. They had used subtle, calculated tactics to gaslight me, to make me second-guess myself. Every accidental illness, every unexplained trip to the hospital, every time they smiled at me with that false concern, it had all been part of their plan. But now the truth was undeniable. The investigators had everything they needed. And as I sat there in that cold, impersonal room, I realized something. I wasn't the victim anymore. I had turned the tables. I had gathered the evidence. I had watched them unravel piece by piece as they tried to cover their tracks. Detective Mendoza walked into the room, breaking my thoughts. "We've got the files, Mary," she said, her voice firm. "We've got everything we need to bring them in. It's all right here." She pointed to the stack of documents on the desk. "And we'll be charging David with attempted murder, conspiracy, and a few other things we're still sorting out. Emily, too." The weight of her words didn't sink in immediately. For months, I had lived in fear, unsure of what was happening to me, unsure of who I could trust. And now, I had the power to see this through to the end, the power to make sure they paid for everything they had done. I nodded slowly, feeling a sense of finality wash over me. "It's over, isn't it?" I asked, though I already knew the answer. Mendoza's expression softened for a moment, a small flicker of empathy breaking through her professional demeanor. "It's over. But the real work is about to begin. We need you to be ready for what comes next, testifying and cooperating with the prosecution. It's going to be hard, but we'll make sure they don't get away with it." "I'm ready," I said, my voice steady despite the storm that had been brewing in my chest. "I've been ready for months." As she left the room, I sat there for a moment, taking in everything that had happened. The fight wasn't over. It had only just begun. But now I knew that no matter how hard David and Emily fought, they were already trapped. They had underestimated me. They thought they could break me. But I was stronger than they had ever imagined. The evidence was irrefutable, and justice would be served. The days following the revelations were a whirlwind. It felt as if the entire world had shifted beneath my feet. I had gone from being a passive victim, uncertain of my place in my own life, to someone who finally had control over my destiny. But despite the mounting evidence, despite the cold certainty that David and Emily's lies had been exposed, there was still one thing left to do: confront them. The trial was looming, and while I had already been interviewed by the police and the prosecution, there was still an emotional weight that lingered. It wasn't just about the courtroom. It was about facing them, looking them in the eyes, and seeing the faces of the people who had betrayed me. The phone call came late one evening. David. The call I had been dreading. When I saw his name flash across my screen, I didn't hesitate. I answered it, knowing this would be the final moment before everything came crashing down. "Mary," his voice came through the line, low and shaky. "Can we talk?" I didn't reply immediately. I wasn't sure what I could say. I wasn't sure if I even wanted to hear his excuses. But I took a deep breath, knowing this was part of the process. "What do you want, David?" There was a long pause on the other end of the line before he spoke again. I need to explain. You don't understand. It wasn't supposed to go this far. It wasn't supposed to be like this." His voice was frantic, almost pleading. I let out a bitter laugh, feeling the anger well up inside me again. "You're right about one thing, David. It wasn't supposed to go this far. You and Emily thought you could break me, manipulate me, but you didn't count on me fighting back." I could hear the panic in his voice as he tried to explain, but I wasn't interested in hearing him rationalize his actions. "You've hurt me in ways I never thought possible," I said, my voice calm, though the rage simmered underneath. "You and Emily, you've poisoned me, sabotaged my career, my health, and now you want to explain yourself? After everything?" He was silent for a moment, and when he spoke again, his tone had shifted. There was something darker in it. I'm sorry it had to come to this, but you don't understand, Mary. I did it for us. For you. I was trying to protect you. His voice cracked, but I didn't buy it for a second. Protect me? I scoffed. You call poisoning me trying to ruin my career protecting me? You never cared about me. You were always more concerned about yourself, about keeping your little empire intact. You and Emily were so desperate to keep your control, to stop me from getting ahead, that you were willing to go to any lengths to destroy me. David's voice was barely a whisper. I never meant for you to get hurt, Mary. I just wanted to slow you down. I felt a surge of bitterness rise within me. Slow me down? David, you've already done more damage than I can even begin to describe. I've spent the last few months fighting for my life, fighting for my career, and what? So you and Emily could feel secure? There was a long silence on the other end. And then, finally, David spoke in a voice I barely recognized. It wasn't supposed to be like this. I was trying to protect you. I never wanted it to get to this point. I just needed to make sure you wouldn't ruin everything. I felt a cold, bitter laugh escape my lips. Ruin everything? You've ruined everything, David. You've ruined our marriage, you've ruined my trust in you, and you've ruined your future. You've betrayed me, and there's no coming back from that. His voice wavered, desperate now. I love you, Mary. I've always loved you. I didn't want to hurt you. I closed my eyes, shaking my head. I can't even look at you right now. You're no longer the man I married. You're just a stranger who tried to destroy everything I built. And for what? A power struggle? To protect a sick illusion of control? David's voice cracked. Please, Mary, don't do this. You don't know everything. You haven't heard my side. We can work this out. But I wasn't interested in his side anymore. I had heard enough. I had seen enough. You should have thought about that before you poisoned me, David, I said, my voice colder than I thought possible. I've already made my decision. The truth is out, and now you and Emily will have to face the consequences. There was a long pause, and then I heard him sigh deeply, as if all hope had drained from him in that single moment. I'm sorry, he whispered. I never wanted this. But his apology meant nothing. The damage had been done. I wasn't the same woman who had walked into that house months ago, naively trusting the people closest to her. I was stronger now, I was smarter now, and I wasn't going to let them win. I hung up the phone without saying another word, a weight lifted off my shoulders. The conversation had been draining, but it had also been necessary. I had confronted him. I had heard his weak apologies, his pitiful justifications. And now it was time to move forward. The next morning, Detective Mendoza called. They've been arrested, Mary, both of them. The charges have been filed. I felt a strange sense of calm wash over me. This was it. The end of one chapter, and the beginning of another. I'm ready, I said, my voice steady. Let's make sure they never hurt anyone again. The courtroom was filled with a tense silence as I took my seat on the witness stand. The air was thick with anticipation, the kind that settles in a room just before the truth is laid bare for all to see. I could feel the weight of the moment bearing down on me. This was the culmination of everything I had fought for. The end game. For months, I had lived in the shadow of fear and betrayal. But today, the truth would finally come to light. David and Emily sat at the defense table, both looking remarkably composed, though I could see the cracks in their facades. Emily, always so poised, now looked nervous, her hands trembling in her lap as she avoided my gaze. She had always been the one to hold the power, to command the room with a smile and a few well-chosen words. But today, she was nothing more than a defendant, her carefully crafted image crumbling before the court. David, on the other hand, was a picture of quiet defeat. His once confident posture was now hunched, his eyes darting around the room as if searching for a way out. He avoided making eye contact with me, but I could see the guilt in the set of his shoulders. He knew he was done. They both did. The prosecutor stood up, her voice firm as she addressed the court. Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, we have gathered irrefutable evidence that proves the defendants, David Bennett and Emily Anderson, conspired to poison and harm Mrs. Mary Bennett over several months. The motive? Simple: jealousy, greed, and a desperate desire to eliminate someone they saw as a threat to their ambitions. I watched as the prosecutor presented the evidence. The toxicology reports, the medical records, and the text messages between David and Emily detailing their plan to sabotage me. The phone recordings, too, played for the jury. David's voice, almost pleading, as he tried to justify his actions. It wasn't supposed to go this far, he had said. We just needed to slow her down. The words echoed in the courtroom, and I felt the sting of them once more. But this time, they didn't have the power to hurt me. They were just words. Empty, hollow words. Words that had no power over me anymore. The prosecutor called several expert witnesses to the stand. They explained the toxins found in my system and Emily's, the deliberate nature of the poisoning, and the clear intent to cause harm. Each expert's testimony painted a picture of a well-orchestrated plot, months of planning, careful execution, and the unyielding belief that they could get away with it. But they hadn't counted on one thing: me. I refused to be their victim. When it was my turn to testify, I stood up slowly, my hands clammy but my resolve unwavering. I had rehearsed this moment in my mind 1,000 times, but now that I was here, I couldn't help but feel a pang of nervousness. This was it, the moment where I had to look David and Emily in the eye and tell the world what they had done to me. I took a deep breath and faced the jury. I loved my husband, I began, my voice steady despite the emotions swirling inside me. I trusted him, and I trusted Emily. They were family. I never imagined that the people closest to me, people I loved, would try to destroy my life. But they did. They poisoned me and tried to ruin my career. And for what? So they could keep their power. So they could keep me from succeeding. I paused for a moment, the weight of my words sinking in. I spent months questioning myself, wondering why this was happening, why I was always sick, why I felt so weak. But when I finally discovered the truth, I realized that this wasn't just about me. This was about them trying to eliminate a threat, my success, my career. They thought they could control me. But I didn't give up. I fought back. I gathered the evidence, and I brought it to you. I turned to look at David and Emily, who sat in silence, unable to meet my gaze. And now, I continued, I stand here not as their victim, but as someone who has reclaimed her life. No matter what happens today, I know one thing: they won't break me. They won't ever break me. As I finished my testimony, I felt a sense of finality wash over me. The truth was out. I had done everything I could to ensure that David and Emily faced the consequences of their actions. It wasn't just about revenge, it was about justice. It was about holding them accountable for the pain they had caused, not just to me, but to anyone they tried to manipulate in the future. The trial stretched on for several more days, the defense making its case, but it was clear that David and Emily had no solid defense left. The evidence was overwhelming. The jury had seen the truth, and when the time came for closing arguments, the prosecutor's voice rang clear and strong. They thought they could destroy her, the prosecutor said, gesturing toward me, but Mary Bennett stood strong. She fought back. And now, we ask that you do the same. We ask that you deliver the justice that Mary deserves, that her husband and sister-in-law deserve. They tried to poison her. They tried to steal her future. And now it's time for them to face the consequences. The jury deliberated for only a few hours, but it felt like a lifetime. When the verdict finally came, I was sitting with my lawyer, my hands clenched in my lap. I couldn't breathe. I had prepared myself for any outcome, but still, my heart pounded in my chest. I had come this far, and I needed to hear those words. The bailiff stood up and addressed the court. We, the jury, find the defendants, David Bennett and Emily Anderson, guilty of attempted murder, conspiracy, and aggravated assault. We recommend the maximum sentence. The words hit me like a wave. I wasn't sure if I was hearing them correctly, but the silence in the room told me I had. David and Emily had been found guilty. Justice had been served. I stood up slowly, the tears coming unbidden now. Tears of relief, tears of anger, tears of grief. The weight of everything I had endured, the pain, the betrayal, it was all finally coming to an end. As the officers moved to take David and Emily into custody, I watched them closely. They were silent now, their masks gone, their true faces revealed. They had been brought to justice, and I had been the one to make it happen. The trial was over, and the world had shifted once more. It was strange how quickly things can change, how you can go from feeling completely powerless to standing tall with the weight of victory in your hands. Yet, despite the verdict, even though David and Emily were finally going to pay for what they had done, I felt an emptiness I wasn't prepared for. Justice had been served, but there was still something lingering, a sense of loss. The days after the trial passed in a blur. I had a strange sense of detachment, like I was watching my life unfold from a distance. I had spent so much time fighting, so much time focused on survival, that I hadn't truly stopped to reflect on what had just happened. Now, I was left to pick up the pieces. I didn't go to work for a while. I needed space. Space to breathe. Space to think. Space to rebuild. The months of deception, the near-daily stress of wondering what would happen next, had taken a toll on me, more than I had ever realized. It wasn't just about the physical poison anymore. It was about the emotional toll. I had to reclaim myself, reclaim my peace of mind. I spent those first few days walking around the city, letting my thoughts settle. The streets of Nashville felt different now, familiar yet unfamiliar, as if I were seeing everything through new eyes. I had changed. I didn't know exactly who I was anymore, but I was determined to figure it out. One afternoon, I found myself sitting in a small cafe, sipping a latte I hadn't bothered to drink in months. The simple pleasure of it, sitting in peace, knowing I was safe, was overwhelming in a way I hadn't anticipated. I realized how much I had missed moments like this, moments of stillness and calm. The world had felt like it was moving at a breakneck speed before, always full of tension, always pushing me to the edge. But now, with the court case behind me, I could finally exhale. My phone buzzed on the table, pulling me out of my thoughts. I picked it up, expecting another message from my lawyer or an update from the company, but it wasn't. It was a text from an unknown number. I hesitated before opening it, wondering who would be reaching out to me now. "Mary, this is Kate from Henderson Enterprises. I hope you're doing well. We're excited to let you know that the board has unanimously decided to move forward with your proposal. The Henderson account is yours." My heart skipped a beat as I read the words. For months, I had been fighting for my life, for my career, and now, it seemed like everything was falling into place. The account, the one I had fought so hard for, the one Emily and David had tried to steal, was mine. I was finally getting what I deserved, and I could feel a sense of validation wash over me. I couldn't help but smile as I typed a quick response. "Thank you, Kate. I'm honored. Let's make this a success." But then the weight of it hit me. It wasn't just about the business deal anymore. It was about my journey, the hard work, the strength I had found deep within myself to rise above the chaos and the betrayal. I hadn't just earned this opportunity, I had fought for it, and that was worth more than any contract. I took another sip of my latte, letting the warmth of the drink spread through me. It felt like a small victory, but it was mine. I had rebuilt my life from the ashes of what David and Emily had tried to destroy, and now I had a future, one I controlled. It wasn't just about proving them wrong, it was about proving to myself that I was capable of overcoming anything. The next few weeks were a blur of meetings, phone calls, and strategy sessions. But this time, it was different. This time, I wasn't just going through the motions. I was thriving. I was in control of my career, my future, and my life. The fear that had once held me back, fear of failure, fear of what might happen next, was gone. I also found myself reconnecting with the people who truly mattered. My friends who had been there for me through the darkest days were my support system now. I spent more time with them, letting myself enjoy simple moments of laughter, of friendship. I needed to surround myself with people who cared about me, people who could remind me that I wasn't alone. One evening, I met with Rachel, a close friend from college, at a local bar. We talked about everything, the trial, the work, the future, and for the first time in what felt like forever, I found myself laughing. I wasn't just surviving anymore, I was living. "Mary, I'm so proud of you," Rachel said, taking a sip of her drink. "You've been through so much, and look at you now. You're unstoppable." Her words struck a chord deep inside me. Unstoppable. That's exactly how I felt. I had faced the worst betrayal a person could imagine, and I had come out stronger on the other side. Nothing would ever break me again. As the evening went on, I realized that the real victory wasn't about the lawsuit or even about the Henderson account. It was about reclaiming my power. It was about learning that no matter what happened, I could handle it. I was capable. I was stronger than I had ever realized. And as I walked home that night, the cool Nashville air wrapping around me, I felt the quiet satisfaction of someone who had won more than just a battle. I had won my life back. And no one could take that from me. It had been a year since the trial, and as I stood in front of a crowded room at the Nashville Business Leaders Conference preparing to give my keynote speech, I couldn't help but feel a sense of irony. A year ago, I had been a woman on the verge of collapse, betrayed by the people I loved most, and uncertain of my future. But today, I was standing on top of a mountain of achievements, personal and professional. The crowd before me buzzed with anticipation. I was about to speak to some of the most influential business leaders in the region, all of whom had once looked at me with skepticism. I had earned my place here, not by chance or by favoritism, but through my hard work. And that knowledge filled me with a quiet, resolute confidence. The irony wasn't lost on me. Emily and David had tried to ruin my career, my life. They had tried to poison my future, both literally and figuratively. But now I was standing before an audience that would hear my voice and my story and understand exactly what it meant to overcome adversity. As I approached the podium, my eyes scanned the crowd. There were faces I recognized from the business world, some of them unfamiliar, others from my past, like Kate from Henderson Enterprises, who had helped me land the biggest deal of my career, and Rachel, my dear friend who had supported me every step of the way. They were here for me, just as they had been throughout this entire journey. I took a deep breath, feeling the weight of the moment, and then I began. Success isn't just about talent or hard work. It's about integrity, I said, my voice firm, projecting to the audience. It's about building relationships based on trust, and when those relationships are tested, it's about standing strong. Sometimes the biggest threats to our success come from those closest to us. But surviving those challenges, coming out stronger on the other side, that's where true success lies. The words felt true as they left my mouth, and I knew they weren't just for the crowd. They were for me, too. I had spent so much of the last year in a state of survival mode, fighting for my life and my future. But now, it was time to thrive. It was time to move beyond the pain and embrace the success I had earned. I glanced down at the notes in front of me but didn't need them anymore. The speech was flowing from me effortlessly now, a reflection of all I had learned during this ordeal. The most important lesson I've learned over the past year is that sometimes our greatest strength is our ability to rise from the ashes, to rebuild when everything seems lost, and to hold our heads high, no matter what others may try to do to us. As I spoke, I could see the faces of the audience shift. There were nods of agreement, a few people even scribbling down notes. The words were landing, and I felt a deep sense of pride. This was no longer just about the business deal. This was about something much deeper, the lesson of resilience, the power of self-belief, and the importance of rising above the challenges life throws at us. By the time I finished, the room was silent for a moment, and then the applause began. It started slowly, but soon it was a steady crescendo, filling the room with a wave of energy. I stood there, my heart pounding in my chest, feeling a rush of emotions, relief, pride, and an overwhelming sense of peace. This was the moment that would mark the end of one chapter and the beginning of another. Later that evening, I received a message from Kate at Henderson Enterprises. We're thrilled to have you on board. This is just the beginning, Mary. Let's make it count. The message was a confirmation of everything I had worked for. The Henderson account had been the key to many more opportunities. And now, with the business world taking notice of my success, I was on the path I had always dreamed of. But this time, it wasn't just about proving my worth. It was about embracing my power and my strength and realizing that I could shape my future. As I stood on the balcony of my hotel room that night, overlooking the glowing skyline of Nashville, I thought back to everything that had led me here. The betrayals, the lies, the poison. It had all been part of the journey. And while I wouldn't wish it on anyone, I knew that those dark moments had shaped me into the person I am today, the person I had always been capable of becoming. Success was no longer just a goal. It was a reflection of my perseverance, my growth, and my refusal to be broken. The truth had come out. The people who had tried to destroy me had been held accountable, and now I was free. Free to live my life on my terms. I smiled to myself, feeling a sense of peace that I hadn't known in a long time. The future was bright, and I was ready for whatever came next. Through everything I endured, I learned that resilience isn't about avoiding hardship, but about how you respond to it. Life isn't always fair, and people we trust may betray us, but that doesn't define us. What defines us is how we rise after we've been knocked down. The pain, the betrayal, the uncertainty, it all became a powerful catalyst for growth. I now know that no matter how dark things may seem, I have the strength within me to fight back, to rebuild, and to never let anyone or anything steal my power again. The lesson is clear. My future is in my hands.